Hello everybody, welcome back to Captain Equine. Today we are going over our story time portion. We're going to continue talking about Mac and how sort of his medical care has been going. Then we're going to talk about overall the Manners Challenge, just going to tell you where you can find your troubleshooting PDF and go over some questions that have been commonly asked. And finally, we will be going over a little bit of motivation. Let's go ahead and get right on into our storytime portion, talking about Mac. So as a recap from last week, if you want all the details, go check out episode 3 of the podcast. Mac is my 2-year-old gelding. He's turning 3 in April. He jumped over a fence one way, got one leg all cut up by barbed wire, jumped back over the fence, and degloved his other leg by hitting a fence post. So whenever we went to go and do that final bandage change, stacked bandage into normal bandage, the sensation of stitches being outside of the skin and rubbing made it to where Mac was really disagreeable. He just did not want to have that bandage on. So we took a couple photos, we sent it to the vet to see what our options were because we didn't want to put anybody inside of a dangerous situation. A young gelding who's been trapped up inside of a stall for 2 weeks, 3 weeks now, isn't exactly something you can really... It gets to a point where logic stops working. So that's sort of what the situation was. The logic of, well, you need this to do it. I trained you to do this. You're fine. Stopped working. Which just means you need to work more in depth and was completely expected to happen at some point, given as the bandage change trainings happened for 3 days, multiple times over those 3 days, but only happened for 3 days. In hindsight, whenever you're doing these like high in-depth trainings, doing them for 3 days straight, you need to continue doing them afterwards more often than once every 2 days. You need to continue pushing as hard as you can towards that. However, I was just so excited that I could finally move on to start working on things that we needed to work on. I forgot to continue to push as hard as I could on the bandage changes, which is one of the reasons. Also, it was cold, like I said, 2 weeks. Lots of things adding into the fact that he was not going to let us change that bandage. So we got the okay from the vets to let him go non-bandage. Thankfully, it was cold, so there weren't any flies out. And we have what we call silver spray. It's really aluminum spray. And we don't like using this long term. But until our wound dust from silver lining herbs, I believe, came in, that was our only option, and we were just trying to keep it from being infected. Also, I apologize for my voice and the frequent breaks. I am still sick. So, yeah, just sorry about that. So, the problem with silver spray is Mac does not like sprays. I have done lots of training sessions with him over the years, over the 2 years. It hasn't been that long. But I've done lots of training sessions based off of that, and it always gets to a point where we're okay with it, we're not running from it. I let it go a little bit too long, and we're back where we started. Or he has a bad experience, like whenever he, if you guys check out on my YouTube channel, Captain Equine, there's a video that's called The Countdown. There's a big playlist. It's Mac turning 2, and all the days leading up to it, I was preparing for all the events I had prepared for him, and he had this big wound on his neck. So the flies were eating away at that wound, and I was just doing all I could to silver spray it, fly spray it, and did like 80 million sessions based on fly spray and all those things. It had gotten to the point where the wound was getting a little bit infected, so whenever I would fly spray it, it would be cold and it would hurt a little. So that created a new component to, well, I don't like sprays, they hurt. So this whole experience has also taught me that even though I was giving him some space, some time to think about it, have that incident wash away from his mind, I definitely should have continued working on sprays and continued getting him comfortable with it, because that would have made this next part so much easier. You live, you learn. So I first tried outright, and he was getting a little bit upset, a little aggressive. So I decided to start trying to position him from inside the stall and reaching under stall gates and like through stalls to spray it. Just to get him used to it for a little while. And that worked beautifully for like 4 sessions. That final day, one more day before the wound dust arrived, he figured out my games and stopped wanting to play them. Now, at this point, I'm sort of sounding like a Debbie Downer, but I want y'all to understand that, like, there was a lot of good that came from this. A lot of learned lessons, a lot of things that he was doing right, things that were going on before within the last 2 weeks that sort of erased themselves and found a way to move forward and stop having such big issues. So while the wound care wasn't going the greatest this last week, everything else was. So during that last 2 days, it was an awful lot of missing the silver spray and getting really close to getting the wound. That last day was just a mess, and I was terrified his wound was going to get infected. Even though it was basically scabbed over at this point, I was just so scared because we had come so far. Thankfully, because of the cold, there were no flies. I was keeping his stall super clean. He didn't get infected, which was like a breath of fresh air. Finally, something went right these last 5 days. So the wound rest arrived, and we got to go and play with that. Now, I was, at this point, still doing the rubbing down, but the moment I got to the wound, he stopped letting me, except for the session where I got the wound dust. He let me gently brush my fingers down the wound, and it was an open wound at this point. Like, it's not bloody or anything, but it is, in fact, an open wound. So he let me brush my fingers down his wound, and then after that happened, I started putting wound dust on. So the wound dust is literally like it sounds. It's just a powder. And at first, I was running my hand down his leg, holding my hand in like a fist with the powder inside, and then once I got on the wound, I would open my hand to a cup and sprinkle it on it and close it, just like I was doing with those reps. That worked for the first day. After that, he figured out the game and was like, I don't really like this powder stuff. It makes me sneeze. It makes you sneeze. It's very sneezable. But also, I'm sick, so like, meh. So I don't want you to put that on like that anymore. So I then resorted to grabbing some, getting as close as I can, and throwing it onto the wound. And that works beautifully. That's the point we're at now. It's still working great. And I'm continuing to do positive reinforcement sessions to sort of make him calm and easy to work with. So I'm sure some of y'all are going to be curious about the bad behaviors that happened in the 2 weeks. And I will definitely be talking about those next podcast. I feel like those are some that are better to like leave bunched together instead of separating them up. With all that done, I'm going to answer some really commonly asked questions. First off is, what is positive reinforcement? So positive reinforcement is a way of, instead of doing, whenever they're doing a behavior you don't like, you punish them, and that leads them towards a behavior you do like. Very simple terms. You click and treat them, reward them whenever they do a step towards the behavior you want, and use shaping plans and all the other stuff to push your horse towards a behavior you want. For example, in the step-by-steps for manners, you teach them to put their head away whenever you say manners. And eventually that'll become their calm default, where they put their head away whenever you're not asking them to do something. But you have to continue to do that by having them push their head away over and over and over again for them to get the message. Strangely enough, I've had a lot of questions about my opinions on stalls, like whether or not stalls are kind towards horses, whether or not they should be kept in them, etc. and so forth. So I'm just going to tell you how my horses are treated in accordance to that. In the winter, fall, maybe spring, we haven't done spring yet in this new plan, so we'll see. They are let out during the day, put up at night. This is because it rains constantly, the pasture is extremely muddy, and it helps their hoof health, etc. and so forth. During the summer, they are let out at all times. It is way too hot to have them up in a stall. And whenever they are in a stall, they come in, they eat, their fans are blowing, then they get out. We also constantly bathe them and do things to also help with the heat. I do live in Texas, so it's an oven or a freezer at all times. The only way I think that stalls are unkind to horses are if your horse is locked in a 20x20 stall, only let out to run like 30 seconds and then put back in. If they're let out constantly, like if they're 4 days a week, or honestly every day, they should probably see the outside of their walls, but at least 4 days a week are getting out, exercising, hand grazing, doing something outside, because they are outside animals. They're not inside ones. They got to be let outside. Then that, if you're doing at least that, then it's not that bad. Also, of course, if they have food, water, and I give toys to all of my horses that are in stalls for longer than just the night, so toys as well. Now, of course, medical reasons that you should not be removing your horse from the stall if your doctor told you not to, or your vet. If your vet told you not to, don't. But it's just as important for those horses to also get something to stimulate them, something that they can do while they're inside the stalls, which is why if you check out my video on Captain Equine, my YouTube channel, you will see things to do with your horse on stall rest, and it goes over all the things I'm doing with Mac on stall rest, and it's a lot of really fun activities for him to do. So a question I recently got is, how much do you feed a horse? That really depends on your horse and their movement level. So my working appendix, Atlas, he's super skinny, he can never seem to gain weight, but we've gotten him to a point where he's like not terrible. So he gets 2 flakes of alfalfa at night, 2 quarts of alfalfa, 1 quart of Timothy, Vermont blend, flax, or whatever fat we're using at the moment, and supplements for whatever he got going on. While my growing boy Mac, he gets 1.5 flakes of alfalfa at night, quart of alfalfa, quart of Timothy, and that's it. Our horses that are in rehab get mainly Timothy cubes and hay. All the other horses get Timothy cubes and hay as well, but a little bit of alfalfa so that it can help them gain muscle. And I can't really think of a better term to put it, but our horses that are like not being actively rehabbed, actively ridden, etc., or are being trained to be ridden and rehabbed, that's Loki and Phoenix. They only get Timothy and hay, which allows us to use alfalfa as a much bigger prize during positive reinforcement than it would have been otherwise. And finally, on this segment, if you guys are participating in the Manners Challenge, I would go ahead and check out my link tree, where I will be linking my Manners Troubleshooting PDF. You can also find a little bit of extra help in my First 4 Skills Guide, and I do have a YouTube tutorial series on this. It's not the greatest quality, so don't expect anything amazing, but it does lead you through the steps as well. That's all for our questions and challenge segment. Let's move right on to motivation. Go train, go work, go do something with your horse. That's it. I hope you guys all enjoyed today's podcast. Come back next week for the winners of the Manners Challenge, as well as the next challenge. Hint, it's leading. Bye.